Hello, everyone, and a warm welcome to launch of the Tax for Growth's latest policy toolkit on harnessing AI and data for tax administrations. We're just going to get started we're going to wait just a couple minutes past the hour to get started. I just wanted just one quick note. We are going to have a Q&A for the last 10 or 15 minutes of this session. And if you wish to submit a question during the webinar at any point, please use the Q&A function, and you can upvote a question by clicking the thumbs up icon. And I should note that this session today is going to be recorded, and it will be posted on the website afterwards, along with other materials such as lecture slides. So it's going to be available on the website after the webinar. So let's just wait a minute or two more, and then we'll get started. Okay, I think we're ready to go. So again, welcome everyone, and thanks so much for joining the launch of the Tax for Growth's latest policy toolkit, which is on harnessing AI and data for tax administrations around the world. I'm very pleased to be here. I can see there's a lot of you who've joined, so that's very exciting. My name is Anders Jensen. I'm the lead academic for the Tax for Growth initiative, and I'm also an associate professor in public policy at Harvard's Kennedy School, and I'm going to be chairing today's session. So we're here today because AI is no longer some future prospect. It's not something that's out in the distant future for tax administrations. It's really a present day reality. Research done by the Tax for Growth Initiative, as well as other organizations, has shown that as much as half of tax authorities are already using AI. And within the Commonwealth, over 75% believe that it's going to fundamentally transform how they operate. So while that's promising, it's also important to highlight that there is a significant and potentially dangerous gap between the sort of hype and momentum around AI and the sort of hard work, the nitty-gritty day-to-day work of implementing AI for effective ways. And many administrations, according to work that we've done, surveys that we've conducted with tax administrations, really indicate that there's some amount of pressure to both purchase expensive external tools and implement them in a sort of leapfrogging way before all the data foundations to support these AI tools have been implemented. And so today what we're doing is we're launching the ITC policy toolkit, which is called Harnessing AI and Data for Tax Administration. And its main purpose is to be a sort of pragmatic manual that can accompany tax authorities along the way towards implementing it. And it tries to move away from what is arguably a sort of black box of AI where no one really understands what's going on inside, and instead tries to introduce some practical core concepts for implementation and the effective use of AI in tax administrations. These concepts include ideas such as the engine and the application. The engine, for example, is the idea that the AI's effectiveness is going to depend as much on the sort of complexity and the scientific value of the AI model as it is going to depend on the administration's internal capacity, whether that be the data quality, the specialized skills, or the governance frameworks. And another idea that's emphasized in the toolkit is the idea of the application, which is that AI can be deployed for such a wide variety of external results, ranging from VAT fraud detection to risk scoring of customs shipments, to taxpayer chatbots and sentiment analysis. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to take a first step towards exploring AI for taxation. And we have an incredible panel of experts whose work and experience really cover some of the key sort of pillars of what matters for AI taxation in the domains of both technical excellence, strategic leadership, and frontline data execution. So the panelists we have with us today, I'm very pleased to introduce them. It's Professor Kuzmina Doroguntu, a professor in practice in the Data Science Institute at the LSE. We have Milas Mpakanye, the director in the Data Science Unit from the Rwanda Revenue Authority. And we have Tony Baloney, the senior quantitative analyst in the AI Project Management Office in the Canada Revenue Agency. So thank you in advance to the three of you for being here. I'm incredibly excited to hear about your insights and to hear about what we can learn drawing on your expertise. But before we get started with the panelists, Saugata Mitra, a policy economist in the Tax for Growth Initiative, is going to give us a very brief overview of the policy toolkit to help guide our discussion. And then we're going to have a panel discussion with Kuzmina, Tony, and Milas. And this will then be followed at the end by a sort of 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A. Before I hand it over to Saugata, I just want to mention a couple of housekeeping items. If you have questions, please type them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. We would like to encourage you to submit them at any point during the discussion. And if you can include your name and organizational affiliation when you write your questions, we'd appreciate that. You can also upvote a question by clicking on the thumbs up icon. And finally, I'd like to emphasize again that that we are recording this panel discussion, and the recording will be made publicly available at ITC's website shortly after the end. So without further ado, over to Saugata to lead off with the presentation.
Thank you so much, Anders. I hope you can all see my screen. So we are very excited today to be launching our policy toolkit on harnessing AI and data for tax administrations, specifically written for the Commonwealth Association of Tax Administrators. My name is Saugata Mitra, and I'm a policy economist in the Tax for Growth Initiative at the International Growth Center. It's an honor to be joined by so many of you today. I want to start by zooming out. 200 years ago, the first industrial revolution transformed our external world using steam and fossil fuels to mechanize physical labor and standardize production. Today, we're in the midst of a second revolution, but this one is internal. Artificial intelligence is doing for our cognitive tasks what the steam engine did for our muscles. It is mechanizing the way we process information, detect patterns, and make decisions. Tax administrations are an ideal training ground for AI, with extremely rich administrative data and massive operational scale. 76% of CATA members agree, believing AI will fully transform their functions. As Anders said, we wrote this toolkit because tax administrators are increasingly in the business of information management. To harness this new power, we can't simply buy new tools. We must build a new kind of institutional engine. And this toolkit is the blueprint for that engine. So we propose a dual-track framework for how tax authorities navigate this shift in managing information. The central thesis of our toolkit is simple. You cannot have the application without building the engine. Politicians want the green box, the external impact, but as administrators, we know success depends ultimately on the blue box, our internal capacity to deliver. The toolkit explains how to build the engine, and the key idea is to use early revenue gains from simple pilots to fund the expensive data infrastructure needed to upgrade our engine and our internal capacity. Now, of course, we recognize that tax authorities operate in different contexts, and one size clearly does not fit all. To address this, we introduce a 4-level maturity framework where digital maturity refers to the scope of available data, the quality of data, and whether data is used descriptively or for predictive purposes, such as forecasting. The key insight here is that the quality and scope of available data largely define an administration's digital maturity. For example, for an administration at level 1, with processes that are mostly paper-based, your AI strategy should not be focused on predictive audit models. It should be focused on digitizing transactions. And so our toolkit includes a checklist to also help you self-diagnose your level of digital maturity. Now, bearing in mind that the level an administration is at largely defines the tools that are available, we analyze the evidence to rank use cases by return on investment for developing economies. These are ultimately the applications that generate the revenue gains we can use to upgrade our engine and our internal capacity. We find that detecting fraud and VAT in customs valuation offers the quickest wins, often before you even need complex generative AI. So for example, in the toolkit, we review some research conducted in India where machine learning was used to identify bogus firms. Because machine learning can analyze large amounts of information much more efficiently than humans, the algorithm excels in identifying characteristics of bogus firms that generate fake invoices for firms to claim input VAT on costs they never incurred. Just to conclude, our toolkit is meant to be a practical manual for tax administrations to build their own engines. They can handle the massive scale of modern economies and navigate this complex and shifting space. In the toolkit, we have a checklist for tax administrations to self-assess their level of digital maturity, a roadmap to guide the transition, and detailed use cases and country case studies. To explore how the second revolution is playing out on the ground, I'm delighted to hand over to our panel, who represent the engineers and architects building these systems in real time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shravan, for that introduction. That was really great. And of course, an encouragement for all of you after today's webinar to go online and check out the broader policy toolkit. So with this short presentation in the back of our minds, I want to move forward to the panel discussion part of the webinar. And just as a reminder for everyone who's participating, we'll have a Q&A at the end where you can ask your questions. If you have some questions now that you want to make sure to get covered, please feel free to write them in the text box. So I want to start with Kuzmina, who will, as I'll remember to you all, is from the LSE Data Science Institute. And I think, Kuzmina, to you, my first question is, in a sort of general sense, can you walk us through some of the things that tax authorities can do with AI? What are sort of some of the kind of first order things that AI can help tax authorities enable? And how do you see it used or being currently played out in countries like the UK?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on the panel and for the question, and thanks to all the listeners for joining in. Look, tax authorities are finding out, like, almost everybody else, that you can do a fair bit with AI. So the possibilities really are endless. But just to add some structure to our discussion, I'll give you sort of 3 broad categories where AI can help. And the first category is probably the least exciting one, and that is to use AI to improve internal operations. And there are lots of use cases in this category, from using AI to help out with recruitment to what HMRC here in the UK are doing, which is trying to provide AI tools that will automate and streamline administrative tasks. So what they're looking at are AI tools to summarize the calls of telephone advisors, for example. They're looking at generative AI assistants to help customer service agents, and also just basic rollouts of co-pilot tools to employees. Now, the second category gets a bit more exciting, and that is using AI to make it easier for people and businesses to comply with their tax obligations. Now, I probably don't need to tell anyone on this call, but voluntary compliance is the easiest way to collect taxes. So The question here is, how do you get AI to help with that? And some of the things that we're starting to see in the UK are AI-powered chatbots to answer tax queries. So there's services like Ask HMRC Online, which are intended to make it easier for taxpayers to sift through what ultimately are hundreds of thousands of pages of guidance in order to find the right information that they're looking for. HMRC is also looking at developing bespoke tools, and this is where it gets even more exciting. They're developing a new AI service for the online trade tariff to provide bespoke support to importers and exporters. And finally, we're seeing some other innovative ideas, such as using AI to generate tailored nudges, for example, which, if done right, can really increase compliance. And the final category that I want to highlight today, and we've seen a hint to this in the presentation, is using AI to spot problems. So AI can help target inspections, it can pick up on signals that can point to fraud, but also it can help tax authorities understand where tax systems creak. What parts of the tax code are people and businesses struggling with? Where do you see the highest rates of non-compliance? What parts of the systems do taxpayers complain about the most? Using AI to pick up on these signals and to explore the answers to these questions can be super promising as tax authorities can intervene where needed. So I'll leave you with the sort of three categories of AI uses for now: improving internal operations, making it easier to comply with tax obligations, and spotting problems. But I should say that they're by no means exhaustive, but there are sort of, obvious places to start.
Thank you so much, Kuzmina. That was very very insightful and very helpful to help organize the rest of the discussion. I forgot to mention, of course, but I should have said to the other panelists, if you would like to jump in and add anything to, in this case, what Kuzmina said, or to the questions, please feel free to just kind of chime along. I was thinking that in terms of the question, we would sort of rotate. So I'll now move on to Tony and ask Tony a first question. Let me just remind everyone that Tony's from the Canada Revenue Agency. So Tony, one thing that's highlighted in the toolkit that Shara presented earlier is that digital maturity is a ladder, so to speak. The idea being that each step sort of builds the foundation for the next possible step of what AI can be used for. And if you don't mind me saying, I would think of you as a representative from a sort of very digitally mature administration. I was wondering if you could share maybe one or two lessons about what is it that Canada's Revenue Agency learned kind of early on as you were building some of these early steps on the ladder. What do you think were some of the lessons that could be applied to other tax authorities around the world, including, importantly, those that are really sort of starting on those first steps of this digital ladder?
Yeah, sure. So thank you for the question. And again, thanks for having me and all of us here to participate in this and share what we're doing and try to help support other tax administrations, researchers, and everyone else who's in attendance. Um, it's actually funny that you say, CRA is a very digitally mature agency, because sometimes from the inside, it doesn't feel so much that way. And you kind of take for granted sometimes how far maybe ahead you might be of some other administrations. We do quite a bit to measure our own digital maturity and our AI maturity internally. We have been using the OECD's maturity models. They have a few of them for tax administrations. We've helped to develop some of those, and we use those to look at our own digital maturity. But those we've kind of looked at in the sense of what are our AI capabilities and kind of what are the main pillars that we have that we focus on for the way we kind of organize our entire AI structure within the agency. For agencies kind of just starting out with this stuff, I mean, the number one thing you want to do if you're still doing a lot of paper-based collections, forms, sending things by mail, is you want to try to digitize everything first. But in doing so, trying to also digitize it in a way that will make it machine readable from the outset in an easy manner. I think a lot of the times digitizing things means taking these paper forms and scanning them, and then we have kind of images and we need to use OCR or other kind of advanced techniques. that's a lot for some. So if you can instead move to a natively digital process, that I think is something that's incredibly beneficial, so that from the outset of your digitization process, you're able to move forward with tools that are built then digitally native so that you can move that data through your pipeline. The second most important thing would be making sure that the data is clean. I think AI is no different than kind of any other tool that we've been using in the data world, and that is kind of the same old principle of garbage in, garbage out. If you don't have well-structured data already within your systems, if your systems are not communicating with each other effectively, if data is not standardized internally, it will be challenging, and you will probably not realize the benefits that you are hoping to realize. So I think those two are kind of the most important things, but it all really revolves around having good, clean, robust data.
Thank you, Tony. That's very insightful, and I was smiling a little bit because the kinds of things you emphasize are the very much the sort of bread and butter for researchers as well, such as myself, who collaborate with tax authorities. These are this kind of same core principles that, you know, as you're suggesting, really underpin effective use of AI, as they probably also support many other types of activities within tax authorities. So thank you for sharing that. I want to turn over to Milas from the Rwanda Revenue Authority, and the first question to you, Milas, is around the very exciting data science unit that Rwanda has been implementing, and really which makes Rwanda sort of a pioneer in creating this kind of dedicated unit. And I was wondering if you could share, Milas, a little bit of insights for other countries that are looking to build similar types of units. And I was just wondering if you could take us through some of the steps that you took, that people inside your organization took, to a little bit in the spirit of what Tony described now, to move from sort of less structured data to eventually, as is more the case now, a system that's capable of conducting many complex tasks, such as process drift detection and predictive modeling. So just, you know, for those in the audience who are interested in setting up these kinds of units within tax authorities, can you just walk us through some of the early steps, or some of the most important steps that your team undertook to put together and put in place this dedicated data science unit?
Thank you so much for your question, and thank you for having me. In Rwanda Revenue, the first step that we took, it was to move from manual invoicing and paper-based declarations to structured digital systems such as electronic billing machines and eTax. This step was fundamental. EBM and eTax did not just automate transactions, they standardized data capture at source, timestamps, taxpayer identifiers, transaction values, and filing periods. Once data became machine readable and consistently structured, it became possible to observe behavior over time, which is a prerequisite for any form of drift detection. The second step was to integrate these digital systems to create longitudinal taxpayer views. By linking EBM transaction data with VAT and income tax declarations in eTax, we were able to track how taxpayer behavior evolves across periods and systems. This integration allowed us to detect deviations, such as growing gaps between sales invoices and sales declared, which are early signals of both compliance risk and process drift. The third step was to move away from fragmented silo systems where VAT, customs, and income tax lived in isolation toward a centralized data warehouse, which pulls raw data into a single environment. By centralizing data into the data warehouse, we created a single version of the truth, allowing us to see the taxpayer's entire footprint for the first time. In short, we standardized data through digital systems like EBM and eTax, integrated them to track taxpayer behavior over time, and centralize them in a single data warehouse, turning fragmented data into a foundation for drift detection and prediction analytics.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that was incredibly detailed and very insightful. Thank you for sharing all those achievements and all the possible executions that this particular data science unit has made possible inside the Revenue Authority. That's very interesting. Okay, so we've had our first loop. So I'm gonna come back to Kuzmina for a second round of questions. Again, just a reminder, if you have in the audience, if you have questions based on what the panelists are commenting that you want to ask, make sure to write it in the Q&A or hold on to it, and we'll come to the live questions for at the end. So hold on to your questions. We'll get there in not too long. So circling back to you, Kuzmina, I was hoping that you could maybe discuss what is obviously an incredibly important theme in the context of implementing AI, which is barriers to implementing AI. So can you share with us what some of the barriers to AI adoption are that you are seeing in general within public sector organizations? And again, if you can draw specifically on the experience or the insights from the UK, that would be much appreciated.
Yeah, sure. And look, I mean, this is a topic that we can talk about for a very long time. And for those of you who want a comprehensive answer, my absolute favorite UK government publication from 2025 was a report titled The State of Digital Government Review. So please look it up, especially for those of you who might be working within countries that think of the UK as a shining example of digital government. Please read it to understand sort of the scale of the issues that the government faces here as well. I'll highlight again 3 barriers today. And first and foremost, legacy systems. This is something that we struggle with a lot within the UK. It is absolutely impossible to start thinking about AI if you're looking at technologies that are and systems that are sometimes as old as, if not older than me. What is the scale of the problem in the UK? Well, look, the estimates that we have, which are imperfect at best, show that close to a third of the systems in central government departments are legacy systems. Second is silos, and we can learn here from the experience of Rwanda, and you can imagine the power of having sort of an entire view of a taxpayer. We don't have that. Very few places, I think, have that. And I think part of the problem is that data and technologies are siloed both within and across organizations. If I'm not mistaken, here in the UK, for every new tax, we set up a whole separate system. So joining all of this disjointed architecture and data is a massive headache. And data sharing is a particular issue for HMRC, and one that, us, especially external data sharing, and one that us as academic researchers have been sort of complaining about for a long time. Now, HMRC, of course, does not own the data that it collects from taxpayers. And as such, they cannot share it at will. There are about 250 legal gateways for HMRC to share data. That is a very large number in and of itself, and speaks to the sort of complexity of the system. And finally, there's a risk-averse culture, and you see this in tax authorities, you see this in regulators. The appetite for failure is not there. And this isn't ultimately a technological problem. It's a cultural problem, but we see it a fair bit. Nobody wants to be on the front page as having set up a system a technological system that has failed. So I think I'll outline these 3 for now, but please do take a look at the State of Digital Government Review if you want a more comprehensive answer.
Thank you so much. That was very, very interesting to hear, and a little bit actually in the spirit of a reaction that I had to Tony's earlier reply. There's something very general actually about the barriers to AI adoption that I've also experienced or encountered for other purposes working with tax authorities. So it really seems like there's a sort of deep structural themes that ultimately enable or disable AI, maybe perhaps in similar ways that they also enable or turn off other functions, important functions of tax authorities and government more generally. So that's very, very interesting to hear. Turning back to Tony, I want to ask a question about trust of taxpayers. So in the policy toolkit, there is an emphasis, so there's a highlight of one thing that Canada does, which is called sentiment analysis, which is a form of the data tool that is meant to help better understand the feedback from taxpayers in the context of the interactions that they have with the tax authority. And I think it's fair to say, actually, a little bit in the spirit of the risk aversion that Cosmina also mentioned just before, that there are reasons why we might worry about AI, and one of these is that AI may make tax administrations feel more sort of faceless or more anonymous and sort of non-human in a sort of intuitive way. And so I was wondering, in the context of this, can you talk a little bit about how the Canada Revenue Agency has used these tools to sort of actually try to make the services that they deliver to citizens more human-centric and perhaps more responsive to citizen needs?
Yeah, for sure. I think, well, the whole point, I guess, from our perspective of using any kind of sentiment analysis, is to make the tool more client-centric. I can understand how it may feel as though, I guess, tax agencies are becoming more faceless if we're more automated, more digitized, and less one-on-one interaction. But I think, at least from our perspective, we understand kind of the complexities of each individual case and each individual taxpayer, each individual client that we serve. And we understand that that typically cannot be dealt with in the end by an AI tool. There still needs to be a human element. This is something that we preach consistently within our agency, is maintaining that human in the loop, ensuring that no decisions are being made by AI systems without any kind of human review whatsoever. So really any kind of analysis that's being done, let's say on client feedback that's coming in, service feedback, for example, that's used so that we can better understand and kind of pull out topics from where the pain points are, and how deep the pain is. And then that helps us to be able to strategize for what we can do to fix those things, not only to kind of attack the symptoms, where if it's a long wait, a lot of people are waiting for phone calls. We don't just want to attack the symptom and maybe hire more call center agents, but really, why are they calling? What is the underlying reason for all of these different calls? And how can we upstream make some changes so that we reduce the need for any of these individuals to call in the first place? So there's a use of it. And I think as long as you kind of try to maintain the human element and understand that you will still ultimately need people to review things, to make the right decisions, and sometimes still just to communicate. If you keep that in mind, I think it's not so, I guess, worrisome from a public perspective. Speaking as someone, who is pretty privacy focused in my own my own personal life as a public citizen, I'm actually quite impressed with the way the agency handles that kind of stuff. I did also want to just quickly jump in on what Cosmina was mentioning earlier as well. I think one of the biggest barriers that anyone at a large agency like ours is facing is the cultural piece of that. I think culture change is something that's incredibly important, and like the change management aspect of everything is very important, making individuals comfortable with all of this stuff. So, on the trust part, there's public trust, but there's also internal trust, and our employees need to also trust that the systems that we're using, the tools that we're providing and are available, are actually trustworthy, do have all of these data privacy, um, safeguards within them, We're using privacy by design, all of that kind of stuff that will help employees to better, feel like they trust the tool so that they're more interested in using them, testing them so that we can grow the use of it, but in a very responsible way.
Yeah. No, thanks, Tony. Actually, I'm gonna go off script for a second because a follow-up question that I had to you is actually almost, well, it's very related to what you just said now, and I was kind of wondering how. So, it's one thing to say, and I couldn't agree more with you that trust is important. I think what's less clear, and I don't know if you have any insights from that, from within the Canada's revenue agency, is how do you build trust? Like even internally to the tax authority, like what can be done, as you mentioned as well, from a leadership perspective? Like what is, I still think, again, I'm speaking here as a researcher, that we can identify places where there's high trust, but in the context of an innovation such as AI, I think that's, we need to know how to build trust both internally and externally. And I'm just off the top of your head, can you think of any aspect of the organization? Was there any kind of moment at which there was a signal of a new kind of culture, or was it just kind of building sort of on pre-existing, well-established trust that was already present in the organization?
You kind of have to do both. You definitely have to rely on the established trust that's there, certainly for the internal trust piece. You try to rely on that as much as possible, but you do have to understand that there needs to be a change culturally. There needs to be a shift towards more openness and like a culture of allowing a little bit of failure, but failing fast, so that you can take those lessons and you can quickly reapply them so that you can start new projects and continue on with those lessons. I think building internal trust, for us, we've done a lot of work to present our tools across the agency. We've got something like 40,000 employees across the country, and we've done over 100 presentations around the agency to various groups of employees, just giving them demonstrations, going over the tools, helping them become comfortable with them. I think one of the issues of internal trust is the misunderstanding of the tools. How do we use them? Is this going to replace me in my job? It's a big fear for a lot of people. And I think the key thing there is to help them understand what the tools are capable of and what they're not, and demonstrate to them that there is still a very important human value that is here. And learning how to leverage that tool, I think, will make them trust the use of them better. So it's a lot of use, a lot of testing out.
Well, thanks. That's very insightful. Thanks for sharing that. Milas, I want to come back to you and then talk a little bit more about your experience at the Rwanda Revenue Authority. And the question I have for you is termed the return on investment question, which I know is a concept that commissioners and tax authorities in many settings are keen on. So one thing that the toolkit identifies is that both fraud detection within customs and detection of misreporting within the VAT are identified based on the evidence that exists around the world as some of the highest, as we call them, return on investments in lower income countries. The idea being that for a dollar of effort within the tax authority, for a dollar of administrative expenses, the return on investment in the form of extra taxes collected would be high from these kinds of practices. And I was wondering if you could talk about your experience or the insights and experience of the Rwanda Revenue Authority more generally. What are some of the sort of low-hanging fruits? What are some of the more feasible policies that could have high impact that a tax office can already implement or can implement within the next year or so using the data that they already have? And I think a related question to this is, relative to these kind of low-hanging fruits, to what extent is AI really needed to execute some of these policies? So over to you, Milas, if you want to give some comments on that.
Thank you again. If your tax administration uses an electronic or a digital invoicing system, The quick wins would be to establish automated validation controls between what a seller reports and what a buyer claims. For example, in Rwanda Revenue Authority, a taxpayer cannot file less than what was reported by their electronic billing machines. The VAT claims not supported by valid EBM invoices or customs declaration documents are automatically rejected during the declaration time. A taxpayer cannot claim VAT input twice from a single invoice or claim the VAT input from an invoice that was cancelled. Again, when a business buys goods for resale, they must generate a unique code using USSD and provide it to the seller to complete the EBM invoice. This simple validation layer ensures that the buyer is who they say they are. It prevents ghost transactions from entering the systems. Generally, this doesn't require complex AI. It's a high-impact SQL-based anomaly check. It stops fraudulent refund claims before the tax is lost. And in the next 12 months, any tax office can achieve this by simply looking at where their registration data contracts their transaction data.
Thank you so much, Meredith. Just actually a follow-up on this, a little in the spirit of what we talked about just earlier, which is an appetite for risk and a little bit of a willingness to engage with, the growing pains of implementation. I was just wondering if you could describe whether some of these policies that you mentioned, like the fact that what you report has to add up to, the sum of what is reported digitally from other sources. I could imagine a large number of cases for taxpayers where that ends up not being the case. So does implementing these new sort of digital policies, does that initially lead to a lot of, I don't know, frustration by taxpayers, or not, I don't want to say taxpayer revolt, but resistance by taxpayers? Or how has the experience, you think, from the taxpayer side been when they are confronted with these new policies that are effective ultimately for enforcement, but that from the taxpayer's perspective might initially seem quite drastic? How does the tax authority sort of manage that transition?
So there is no frustration on the side of the taxpayer because it is clear with our legal frameworks how this starts and how it ends. Taxpayers already know that they have to file what they have in their EBM, and just what we do is to validate and to let them that they are filing less than what we have in EBM, and they have to file complete sales.
I see. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, I'm going to allow myself to do a final round of kind of going through our three expert panelists before opening it up to the floor. So, Kazmina, I want to come back to you, and I had two questions in mind. I'm on the fence about which one to ask you, but I guess maybe the one that connects a little bit with what both Tony and Milas were also talking about is you mentioned risk aversion in one of your earlier comments. And I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about, we've mentioned kind of bits and pieces here and there, but from the practitioner's perspective, or actually from the perspective of the taxpayer as well, but what are some of the really kind of biggest risks of implementing AI? What are some of these non-negotiable safeguards that we have to make sure are in place when we think about implementing AI? Because I think it's, taking the perspective of the practitioner, I think it's good to blend appetite for experimentation and innovation with some amount of caution. But what are from a practitioner's perspective, what are some of these kind of most significant concerns, and can we do anything to kind of to prevent those kind of catastrophic outcomes?
Yeah, sure. And look, one of the things that keeps coming up in this event as well is data. And I'm noticing a question in the chat as well about clean data and what does sort of 100% clean data mean. So, Yes, absolutely. The data that you have is gonna matter an awful lot to the success of any sort of AI project that you're setting up. Now, what do we mean about sort of like clean, good data? Well, we need to answer questions such as, is it accurate? Is your data up to date? Does it have what we call, conceptual validity? So do the variables in the data set measure what they are assumed to measure? Is it complete? Does the data set contain values for all the required variables and observations? Is it representative? So is the composition of your data set adequate to serve as a representation of the real world for the intended purpose, and so on? So getting to know your data, its strengths and its weaknesses, and how you can improve it is absolutely crucial. But besides data, there's so many other factors that matter. Do you have the right governance mechanisms in place? Is there accountability built into your system? Is there transparency built in? Is there a human in the loop for the relevant parts of the system? And we heard this from Tony as well. Do the humans have the right tools and training and permission levels to act? So look, yeah, I mean, ultimately, there is no sort of simple short answer here, and we can have, another maybe even like week-long event on this. But setting up a new AI system needs a lot of thought through all of its stages, from its design, development, and deployment, all the way to its final retirement. So, if you want a one-sentence answer is, you need to put in a lot of work. And if you want a piece of advice is, don't think of this as a cost-saving measure. You need to put in a fair bit of investment and time and effort to get it right. And if you're going to think about it otherwise, that's when you'll see them fail.
Yeah, it's a great, it's a great point. Thanks for that. So actually, on the back of what Kasmina just said, and last question to you, Ton, before we go to the Q&A is, I'm wondering what would you say to a tax commissioner, to someone who is in charge of a tax authority and who seems to be keen on, we talked about the sort of steps of the ladder of kind of digital maturity. What would you say to a commissioner who seems very keen on, leapfrogging several of these steps and going directly to step 4 and the most complex kind of versions of AI? What are, like, how can we convince a commissioner to take it slowly, as Camino was alluding to as well, sort of, investing in, the painful, slow, but ultimately most effective way? And just related to that, a more technical question is, I'm wondering if you can comment on, I think, a design question that a lot of commissioners or tax authorities face, which is this question of whether or not to essentially outsource a large number of AI components to third parties, or to really try to build the main components of AI sort of in-house, where the latter might be more slow than just kind of outsourcing to a large extent outside. So 2 parts to the question. Feel free to answer in any amount of time.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, good questions. Geez. How do you convince a commissioner? Sometimes the only way to convince them, unfortunately, is to show them. That's why I had mentioned fail fast. If you can, fail fast if you can. Sometimes it really is, you think you can leapfrog, you seem to think you might have the ability, the quick wins to be able to kind of jump to different places and throw everything all together at once. Usually it doesn't happen that way. Usually things end up being a lot more complicated than you think they do. They're going to end up taking more time. They're going to end up costing more money. So if you're trying to leapfrog, if you can fail fast and take as many lessons learned as you can, and then start from there and rebuild in steps, that would be the best thing. Otherwise, it really is trying to make a case for foundations. That's really what it is. You need to make sure you have good foundations. And yes, data is super important, as we've mentioned, but as Cosmin also brought up, like the whole governance around it is equally important. If you don't have the right people at the table, if you don't have, you know, decision makers able to make agile decisions, things will get delayed, and that will end up costing more money. You definitely need to have all of the key individuals at the table, and you want to make sure that they are involved in kind of all the main business lines and ideas of like security that the agency has. You want, you know, HR involved, you want your privacy teams involved, IT security, architecture, any other different types of teams that would be relevant. You know, add them to the ecosystem as governance partners, and make sure everyone's kind of working together, because of the amount of moving parts, especially in a large agency. There will be some overlap. There will be considerable overlap, actually. So you need to make sure that the responsibilities and the accountabilities are kind of clearly set out. In terms of outsourcing, you know, the buy versus build question, that's something that comes up here all the time. It kind of depends. It depends on what you're looking to do. It depends on how quickly you might be able to build the internal tool. And I think one of the biggest things it depends on is what is the level of kind of data security that you're looking for. You know that you can always build the most robust security if it's done in-house on your own systems, on premise, all that kind of stuff, super secure. This takes a long time. This costs money. This is resource intensive. Sometimes you don't have the budget or just the time to be able to do something like that, and you need to look for some third-party tools. It's really context dependent. If that's something that works better at that time, it should be something, I think, that is pursued. And then maybe in the background, if you have the ability to build in parallel, if long term you think that's something that you want to be able to own, then do that if you can.
Thanks. No, that's great. We have exactly 8 minutes left, so we are just inside our 10-minute bracket for Q&A. So first of all, thank you to the three panelists for these incredible insights from around the world. I'm very, very grateful. So we have a mix of things here. We have a couple of questions, some great questions that have been asked in the chat, so we can revert to those. I do want to mention as well that if you're participating live and you would like to ask your questions live, then please raise your hands and then we can bring you in with your question. But while waiting for someone to come forward digitally and raise their hand, I'm going to start off with just one or two questions from the chat. The first question we have is from Paul from ATAF, and Paul is wondering if there is a way to help tax administration to have 100% clean data. And Paul writes that Tony mentioned that there is a need to have clean data to really benefit or to optimize AI. And so Paul's question is, and it's an excellent question, how much is clean data? Great question. Tough question. I'm hoping someone from the panel would self-select into answering this difficult question. Any thoughts on this on the panel?
I can tell you that I don't have an answer to how much it'll cost. I mean, that again, it depends. It depends on how much data you have. It depends on how much you're trying to clean all at once. There's, of course, the manual processes. There are some, you know, additional statistical processes. You can try to use AI. Generative AI tools are decent at some data cleaning. At least take up, you know, a considerable chunk of time out of the process for the first round. So it could be cost effective if, I guess, you can chunk it properly and you have kind of efficient tools that'll help speed up the process. But in terms of like an actual dollar value, that's kind of hard to say. And then, of course, like, you know, data doesn't have to be 100% perfectly clean. But the closer you can get to that, the better ultimately the quality of your outputs are going to be.
No, that's great. I'll take another question from the chat, and then I'll come to Abidun, who has a raised hand. But another, I think, great question that we haven't spoken so much about in today, I want to make sure we cover is from Ashwin, who asks, how will the tax administration ensure data residency? and sovereignty compliance when adopting cloud-based AI? I think it's a great question, important question as well. Anyone on the panel has thoughts on the residency of data and these questions of data sovereignty that oftentimes also often come up in discussions around adopting AI.
I mean, I can go again.
Go ahead.
Yeah, you can make agreements with cloud data providers to ensure that they use data centers that they have that are local to your region. I think most big cloud providers have something in most large regions. Of course, for smaller countries, that's not going to do it. That then becomes, can you host your own data? I think it is important, obviously, for sovereignty. If there are companies within your country, and I think that's something that we all should be looking at as national tax administrations, is partnering with national companies that are producing tools, that are creating models, that are doing research, universities, doing any kind of internal partnerships that you can with industry and with academia in order to find ways to create systems or make use of existing systems that already are within your country. That kind of is, I think, an optimal way to go about it.
Yeah, it's great, very important. Thanks. Okay, I want to pass it over to Abiodun. Sorry if I mispronounced that name. Can you hear us? And feel free to ask your question.
Thank you, Anders. Tony touched on my question slightly just now. So the two things, I did it in the Q&A box, but let me mention it. We did a study at the WATAF Secretariat on the use of AI in West Africa 2 years ago. So one of the questions we identify is the efficiency of off-the-shelf AI tools. Please speak to that. How, in the case of Canada or the UK, do you find them efficient? Or will you want to advise the low-income countries to start from the scratch? Or how can we use off-the-shelf ones for efficient tax administration? And my second question, I also have academic affiliation. What should be the engagement of researchers to support the use of AI for tax system improvement? What topics will you want to expect researchers to keep engaging in? Anders, you can also speak to this. You are a researcher yourself. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I mean, those were two great questions. Maybe let me, in 30 seconds, take the second one, then I'll leave the first one for the panelists. I think it's a great question to ask what research topics should be studied. I think connecting it to what I mentioned at the beginning, which is these kind of two concepts that the toolkit emphasizes, the engine and the applications. I think those would be two areas. So in the same time, we need to study at a deeper level the engine, which is barriers to adoption. We talked about organizational designs, culture of change, risk aversion. These are very fundamental, general questions that are going to be important for AI as they would for a lot of other policies. And I think we need much more research on that. And then I also think we need a lot of research on, and this connects to your off-the-shelf question on execution. Like, what are some of these more low-hanging, more immediately available AI models that tax authorities and countries around the world that all differ in the underlying data quality and so forth? What are the kinds of executions that are going to be most effective? And the answer to that question will likely vary across countries, which is exactly why we need so much research. Okay, we have 45 seconds left. So does anyone on the panel want to try to take on the first part of Abiodun's question about off-the-shelf AI tools that can be sort of more easily deployed than others?
I mean, there's definitely a lot of them out there. I would recommend kind of going for low-hanging fruit. Try to do something simple, something cheap, go after one problem specifically, use a tool, see how it does it, and then adapt from there. I think if you don't have a lot of budget to be able to kind of make a big transformation, the best thing to do is small steps and then build on top of them.
Yeah, great. Great point. Thanks, Sam. So we are unfortunately at time, and we need to wrap up this what has been a wonderful and very insightful hour of discussion around AI taxation. So first of all, a massive thank you to our three panelists. You're all engaged with AI, which means I know you're all very busy. I want to thank you for taking the time out to come and share some of your insights and experiences with us. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you as well to the audience for the brilliant questions and for engaging with the panelists throughout. So thank you again so much to everyone, and look forward to seeing you soon for some of the content that the Tax for Growth initiative is compiling and building at the IGC. And as I mentioned, both the recording from today as well as the underlying material that was the starting point for today's session will be available on the website as well. So stay tuned, and thank you again so much for contributing to a very interesting discussion.
Thanks, everyone.